Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah. Wa salatu wa salamu ala Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala amma ba'd. Alhamdulillah, it's a great honor and a privilege and a blessing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to have individuals of knowledge with us that we can benefit from. Most of us attended the program yesterday, and this idea came about yesterday, so it was planned at the spur of the moment. We decided we have some time with our dear Sheikh Jamal Zarabozo, and we wanted to spend some time with the youth and other members of the community, just to have an informal conversation, just to ask him those pressing questions, ask for pieces of advice based on his experience and his knowledge, inshallah. So this is an informal program. Like I mentioned, we have refreshments. Everybody's free to grab something and come here and just talk with us. We don't need to get into much of an introduction. We were there yesterday. We know Sheikh Jamal Zarabozo. Many of us have read his books, studied his works, and have benefited immensely from them. And I would like to state for the record as well, in all the teaching that we do, me and my wife in particular, almost exclusively we use his works, alhamdulillah. So everywhere, if you've seen me lecture in different colleges, on the Arba'in, on Tazkiyat al-Nafs, all of my materials from Sheikh Jamal Zarabozo, almost exclusively. And I usually make it a point to mention it in front of the audiences, but I wanted to say that in front of our dear Sheikh as well. And we also have Sheikh Abu Musimma, and he can also join us in adding comments and give us advice, inshallah. So with that, this is an informal program, and let's try to ask questions that are beneficial, that will be beneficial for everybody, in order to live our lives under the shade of the Sunnah, inshallah. So with that, let's...
Can I start?
Sure.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على نبينا محمد وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد. First, I just wanted to express my gratitude to the brothers here in New Jersey, the Why Islam organization and the ICNA New Jersey, for inviting me here and giving me this opportunity to meet with many brothers, and many brothers also that I have not seen in many years, alhamdulillah. I'm actually, by nature, I'm a very shy person, so it's sometimes difficult to get me out of my shell, as some of you have experienced. There's a brother in Connecticut who's been calling me for 7 years now to try to get me to Connecticut, inshallah. But I appreciate the invitation. And I would like to say that, alhamdulillah, from what I've seen from the organization, from the groups here, the organizations that I've seen here, alhamdulillah, I'm very happy, very pleased to see this kind of work going on. And I would hope, inshallah, that you brothers here who are in this community, inshallah, take advantage of these resources that are available to you here with respect to learning about the deen and also practicing it in your own life, and also, inshallah, of participating in that great effort and that great work of making da'wah for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. One of the points that I neglected to mention in the lecture yesterday that I wanted to mention is the fact that our role as Muslims here in I guess now it's the 21st century, I'm still saying 20th century, I have to. Our role as Muslims in the 21st century in this non-Muslim land, whether it's America or any other non-Muslim land, we have to realize that our role is not simply just to live and just to say that Muslims are good people and to say to them, I'm okay, you're okay, and we're all happy. And no, our role here is to spread the true message and let them know what Islam is. Because we cannot just sit here as a community and live and enjoy our lives and just mix with them and not convey the message of Islam to them. If we do that, it could be the case that on the Day of Judgment, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala may forgive some of these kuffar because the message never received them. It never reached them, and may instead punish us for not conveying the message to them. And I, for one, I'm not willing to make that exchange. And it is kuffar. If they want to reject the message of Islam, that is up to them. But we have to give them the real message of Islam, the true message of Islam. Much of what they hear, as you know, much of what they see about Islam is not the true message. And we have now, I don't know how many millions of Muslims in the United States. It is time that we really undertake this responsibility on our shoulders and start presenting Islam openly, clearly, to let them know, to wake them up and to make them realize that there is a different path, and that path is the real path that is pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when I see organizations like Why Islam making such a public commitment and effort to bring the message of Islam to the non-Muslims here in this society, since we are living here, I think this is a very important for all of us to partake and support, and inshallah please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by working in such fields, inshallah. So with that, as the brother said, this is supposed to be extremely informal. You can loosen your ties and and inshallah I'll open the floor to let you. So did you move from here to there so you could ask the first question? Inshallah. Now I need a monitor to call on people. So come back here. You can ask the first question, but come back here.
We just a lot of the brothers had a question. We just wanted to know your personal journey to knowledge, how you started to embrace Islam, and where you began, and how you got to this level of knowledge. Just as by way of advice for young
Muslims. I don't like this kind of question, and then at the same time I like this kind of question. I don't like this kind of question because I said I'm kind of a shy person naturally, and so therefore sometimes it's not easy for me to open up on those kind of questions. But what I like about those questions, and inshallah Abu Muslim, you'll appreciate this, is that it's one of those few questions that you don't have to worry about someone else coming along and saying you're wrong. You have now contradicted the Qur'an or Sunnah or anything of that nature. So what was the question again?
Just some personal background to your journey through learning Islam, your journey of knowledge.
Okay, inshallah.
Where you began and what kind of advice you have for people.
Inshallah, one thing that kind of surprises me sometimes about new Muslims, people who convert to Islam. And this is maybe because we're coming from a society where religion doesn't play that big of a role in your life, right? You can be a Christian and maybe you never even read the Bible or not even know what you're supposed to do, or a Jew or whatever. So I'm always surprised when I hear that someone has converted to Islam and he doesn't show this kind of devotion and drive to learn about Islam. So alhamdulillah, I was not born Muslim. I come from my family is originally from Spain, and we moved here when I was about 6. So I come from a traditional Spanish Catholic family, which means secular, and then sometimes you go to church, especially your mother goes to church. So I did not have, I didn't really have much of a religious background. But when I started to learn about Islam, and when I made the decision to become Muslim, I recognized that this is now my religion. This is going to be now my way of life. And, coming from that perspective, I had a strong drive in me to want to know what my religion is. If I'm going to claim to be a Muslim and say that I'm a Muslim, I should at least know what it means to be Muslim and so forth. And so alhamdulillah, because I was a convert, I had from the beginning this desire to learn about Islam. And one of the first things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guided me to learn about is hadith. And in fact, when I became Muslim, alhamdulillah, I already had a copy of the Qur'an. I had Yusuf Ali. Yusuf Ali, some of the older editions were like this thick. I don't know if you remember those. So I used to carry that around with me and read that. But I was dying to read about hadith. This was already kind of instilled in me at that time. And so there was this collection known as Sahih Muslim. You're all familiar with Sahih Muslim, right? Well, I thought Sahih Muslim meant this is what the Muslim... I didn't know it's the person's name, Muslim ibn al-Hajjaj. So I got a copy of Sahih Muslim as early as I could, and began to, of course, the English translation, begin to read it, and inshallah benefit from it as much as I could. But this starting out in hadith and concentrating on hadith actually has opened up almost all of the other fields for me, because no matter what field you study, whether it is tafsir or fiqh, especially in the Arabic books, in the Arabic literature, as I begin to start reading in Arabic, if you have the stronger background you have in hadith, the easier it is to understand what they're talking about, some of the terms that they use, the sources that they're using, and so forth. So alhamdulillah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made that very easy for me. But I think the most important thing for any individual is to have that drive in himself to want to know his religion. This is your way of life. This is the way of life that you are claiming is pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And there should be something in you driving you to want to know about this religion. If there isn't, then you should be asking yourself, why isn't it the case that I'm willing to sacrifice and really work to learn about my religion? To learn what I should do to be pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. How am I supposed to behave? How am I supposed to act? This should be something, inshallah, in the heart of every Muslim. And as I said, if you do not find it within yourself, you should ask yourself. It doesn't mean that I think that every Muslim should study so much that he becomes a scholar or something of that nature. Obviously, scholarship is, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blesses that on some people and not on others. Not everyone has that ability. But the drive and the desire to learn and know about the religion, this is something, inshallah, alhamdulillah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blessed me with that. And I think it's something that we should all think about and try to develop within themselves. And when you have that drive, you'll find ways and means by which, inshallah, you'll learn about the religion. Learning, all of you are probably in different fields. I know, for example, IIT brothers and computer and so forth. You all know that to learn takes time and sacrifice. You put a lot of time into reading about computers and trying out different software approaches and so forth. And when there's bugs, trying to figure out what's the solution and so forth. You realize that it takes time and effort. And unless you're really willing to put that kind of time and effort, or let me put it a different way, I would hope, inshallah, that you also have that same kind of feeling to put time and effort into learning about Islam, and then, inshallah, the doors will open up to you. And as a recommendation, I think it is very important if people can try to learn the Arabic language. You don't have to speak it. I do my best to avoid trying to speak Arabic under any circumstances. You don't have to speak it. You don't have to know all the contemporary slangs that there are available today. But you have to be able to understand it and to be able to read it. And inshallah, if you do that, this opens, what we have in English, for example, if English is your only avenue to Islamic knowledge, you cannot compare what we have in English to what is available in Arabic. Not the quantity, not the quality. The topics discovered, covered, for example. If I went to Al-Bashir, if I went to my publisher and said to him, I want to discuss or write about certain topics that are available in Arabic, he may reject them because, the demand is not that big here, and so therefore just put those topics on the side and concentrate on these general topics that we want. So, inshallah, if you can do that, you will benefit, inshallah, greatly. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will benefit you greatly, inshallah. Now, after you're the age of, what, 14 now, they say, or 13, any foreign language you pick up, you'll have an accent and you'll not be able to speak it like a native. But as I said, don't worry about that. That's not your, that doesn't have to be your main goal, inshallah. Inshallah. Yeah.
That's the question. How old were you when you embraced Islam?
I was 16.
16.
Okay,
And that was on what year?
Why don't you just ask me how old I am? Is that what you're talking It was 1976. And what year did you become Muslim, if I may ask?
1978.
78?
Yes.
MashaAllah. So, inshallah, the 70s were a productive decade for, it seems.
I was about this similar age.
Is that right? MashaAllah.
So, with the same nature, why you became Muslim? What drive you to become Muslim? Since you were in a background of like secular and mentality,
Yes.
so why you feel like that you want to?
Okay. My story is not as interesting as many other people's stories. So, as I mentioned before, I didn't come from a religious background, but a friend of mine in school invited me to their church, and so I started, more of a social thing than anything else. I started attending that church, and this was the first time I started to read the Bible. So I found it interesting, and I attended that church for some time, and then it came to the point that they asked me to get baptized. This was in California, so for the baptism they go to Disneyland, everybody jumps into the pool, and this is how they get baptized. And so they have a certain date that on like December or whatever, we're going to Disneyland, and you all are going to get baptized. And so since this was my first exposure to, and in this particular group, baptism kind of really means something. And, and so since this was my first exposure to any kind of religion, I said, okay, that's fine, but let me just kind of look around a little bit and make sure that I am completely satisfied with this. And so I studied for maybe a year and a half. I studied Judaism, Christianity, Hinduism, Buddhism. I even noticed you have a Jain temple here. I was surprised to see that. I even studied Jainism for a little bit. And this is where I began to study about Islam. And the thing that, because of my study of Christianity in particular, I was very careful about relying on what people say on behalf of the religion. I wanted to go back to the sources and see what do the sources say. And so that's what led me to the Qur'an. And actually the first Qur'an I read was translated by Qadiani, Muhammad Zafarullah Khan. And the footnotes I could even see that there's a disparity between the footnotes and what the text was saying. But alhamdulillah, the Quran had a great influence on me, and this is what led me then to decide to become Muslim. And so I became I'm in a small city in California. This is in the 70s. It's a city called San Luis Obispo. And I decided I'm Muslim. Okay. I told all my friends I'm Muslim. I went to the local library and I found a book by a missionary, T.P. Hughes, called The Dictionary of Islam. And this is where I learned the Salat from this book and the timings of the Salat. Because as far as I know, there were no Muslims in the city I was living. And so I was just kind of practicing on my own, making my own ijtihad. And then one day I was walking on campus, and this shows you the importance of this kind of organization and this kind of thing. And there was a small index card, and it said, Muslim Students Association, call this number. I said, wow, what do you know? So I called the number, and it was they didn't have a mosque or a building or anything like that. There was a brother's apartment, 2 Kuwaiti brothers, who lived right behind our house. And mashallah, and the rest, alhamdulillah, they treated me very well. The first question the brother asked me on the phone is, "Do you know the salat?" And my answer was, "No, but I know how to pray already." But alhamdulillah, that community, it was a small community, very small community, but very dedicated brothers. And the first ones you meet, the first ones who influence you, of course, you never forget them, inshallah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward them, inshallah. And if the questions continue like this, then it should be an easy session for me, inshallah.
What was the difference between the years from accepting Islam to meeting those brothers in school?
That was probably, I accepted Islam because I left high school at the time that I accepted Islam. So like my last year in high school, I was telling people that I was a Muslim. And then during that summer, I came across these brothers. Yeah, so my Islam wasn't too damaged by my own construction of it. One of the, some of you might have heard my lectures on modernists. And I'm not real fond of modernists. And I have my own personal history with them. There's a famous modernist from the late 19th, early 20th century, Sayyid Amir Ali. And one of his books, The Spirit of Islam, was one of the earliest books that I read. And if you read that, you'll get a very interesting view of Islam, to the point that I concluded that, like pork and these things that are forbidden in the Qur'an, that they are actually permissible. It's not, they might have been forbidden at that time, but they are permissible. There's nothing wrong with them. And I actually had a debate with my father, because my father said, no, I know Muslims and they say that pork is forbidden. I said, no. Look, it's my religion now. Pork is okay. There's nothing wrong with it. Yes?
It's like a completely different topic, if you don't mind.
Okay. Anything else related to that, or did we finish off, inshallah? Okay, inshallah.
One of our others I talked with, I said that the Ash'ari school of Aqidah is like the school that's been followed by the majority of our scholars in our history. They're saying that that's what we should adopt and follow also. Is that any comments on that?
Any comments on that? I would say it is true that the Ash'ari school has been one of the dominant schools throughout the history of Islam. I don't think there's any doubt about that. But I don't think that's the key issue. The key issue is whether or not it is founded on the Qur'an and Sunnah, whether or not it's consistent with the way of the Prophet ﷺ and what he taught his Sahaba and what his Sahaba taught. I think this criteria is much more important than the question of, well, what does the majority follow? Okay, there's no evidence in the Qur'an or Sunnah that the majority will always be following something that is correct. Especially in the later times, we find many hadith about corruption or people leaving from the straight path in Islam. But in general, as a methodology, the Muslims are obliged to obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and obey the Messenger, as we know from many verses in the Quran. And this is the issue. It doesn't matter who it comes from or what it comes from or how popular it is or how unpopular it is. The question is it correct according to the Quran and Sunnah? That's the only issue. And also, by the way, when you get into these kind of names and categories and groups, even the Ash'aris, you have a wide spread of people who are called Ash'aris. And, some of them have very unique ideas, and some of them are, virtually the same as Salafis, except what are known as Salafis, the other people, except on some points, So also this categorization, we have to be very careful about it. Because once you say, well, the Ash'aris are majority, so we should follow them. Well, what do you mean by the Ash'aris? What point in particular? And is that point in particular, is that held by the majority of the Ash'aris or not? So personally, I don't see any need to get into all that. Let's just go back to the Quran Sunnah and ask ourselves, what does the Quran Sunnah say? Yes, sister. Alaikum salam.
Developing their own nasheeds and using musical instruments. So I want to ask you your
Okay, with respect to the latter part, the use of musical instruments, I think it is pretty clear that it is not permissible within Islam. You know, the hadith there's a hadith inside Bukhari in which the Prophet ﷺ is referring to those people who will try to make certain things permissible, and among those is musical instruments. That hadith has been critiqued by some people, and especially contemporary times. But if you do analysis of their critique, you will find that from the principles of ulum al-hadith, their critique is actually not very strong. It is an authentic hadith, and it is a clear statement from the Prophet ﷺ. So I don't think the issue, from my perspective, I don't think the issue of whether music is halal or musical instruments is halal or not. I don't think that this is really one of those topics that you can say, well, the ulama differed on, and so therefore, whatever view you take, inshallah, we can live with that difference. I think this is something that is clear from the Qur'an and Sunnah, and clear in the practices of the Sahaba and the early generations. So I think that issue, to me, that is a very clear issue. With respect to anashid, without music, you said even some scholars are. Pardon me? They quote Ibn Hazm. Okay.
What about percussion instruments? Like, is the drum that they use allowed, or was it just the one-sided though? Like Native Deen or other groups, they use the regular drum and other percussion instruments. Is that the way that they have, like, sending the one-sided drum to every drum and other percussion instruments?
No, I think the basic ruling with respect to musical instruments is that they are forbidden. Okay, that is the basic ruling, and then there are some exceptions to that prohibition. But those exceptions, when we look into the example of during the time of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, those examples, for example, the use of the daf, it was under very limited circumstances. I mean, it was not something, for example, done among the men. It was done in general among for example, for wedding celebration. It was done among the women, not among the men. And these kind of things, the earlier ulama would consider this kharam al-muru'a. They would consider this something unbecoming an individual to do these kind of things. So I think extending that analogy is very difficult, because in general the principle in usul al-fiqh is that if you have something which is an exception to the general rule, you cannot make qiyas or analogy on that exception. Okay. So you have the general rule, and this is known as an exception. You cannot make this exception wider and wider, except what is clearly defined in the text. So so that also I don't think is a very strong argument. And also then to use it under different circumstances, then to use it as a kind of da'wah, and this is something I would say, at the very least, is something unknown in the history of Islam, that this is like a main means of da'wah. Maybe poetry, maybe they'll express some of the teachings in Islam in poetry, but not to the extent of anashid and putting it to rhythm and so forth. My view about anashid in general is somewhat conservative, I would say. I'm not a big fan of it. Okay. But, this is my own personal view. I haven't really studied it enough to say that all those people who are so much into it, this is definitely wrong on their part. But I definitely think an emphasis on it, either as a tool of da'wah or as a hobby and something they get into, I think, like many ulama pointed out, this is something you have to be careful about. This is something that you have to be careful. Anybody who has a background in music, for example, I used to love music before I was a Muslim. That music can really overconsume you, and instead of using your energy maybe to learn an nasheed and to get the rhythm down, and there's other better things that you can be doing, inshallah. But on an exceptional basis, every now and then something done, maybe someone could say there's nothing wrong with that. Wallahu alam. So are you calling on the people? Yes, you're
Well,
here to call on the people.
Well, I have a lot of questions. All right. We'll let the other brothers go.
I have a question, Sheikh. It's about fatwa. A lot of times I get emails from different people who are giving my email address to, and they send me fatwa, which sometimes I don't agree with, because you see, I have a little bit of understanding about Islam because my parents, my ancestors, my father was an imam, and I also read Qur'an a little bit, and I have a little bit understanding of some of the meanings of tafsir. But when a sheikh put out a fatwa, which to my knowledge about the Qur'an, because Qur'an should come first, it goes against the rules of Islam. Have you ever put out a fatwa that will contradict many things in the studies of Islam?
Well, it has never been my intention, I will tell you that much. And, everyone's going to make mistakes. So I might have said something that is wrong, right?
Not in that context, saying something.
Okay.
Like, for example,
Or I could write something that's wrong, if you prefer.
a group of brothers have tried to get me so many times to go to Newark or somewhere to listen to a sheikh who put out fatwa. What is your concept of fatwa?
Okay. First of all, let's see how to handle this. First of all, let's talk about whether or not you know the person giving the fatwa. Know in the sense of this is someone who is recognized, and he's trusted, and he's a good scholar. Okay, as opposed to someone you really don't know, or someone who just happens to be popular, or some kind of fad or something. Right? Now, if there is someone who is a well-respected scholar, he's known for his knowledge, and he gives a fatwa that goes against what you believe should be correct, but at the same time you know that your understanding of Islam is limited as compared to his understanding of Islam, then personally I would have good expectations from that scholar that what he is saying is going to be correct, inshallah. So from the first part, I would give more weight to what he's saying than what I am concluding. But I wouldn't stop there. I mean, I would try to study the matter further to understand why my understanding is so distant from what this scholar has said. And inshallah, you will either see that you'll either see that your understanding is incorrect. It's because of your limited knowledge, or you might find that other scholars disagree with him and point out, as you suspected, that here he's making a mistake, and it's clear that he's making a mistake. But my first inclination would be to accept what the scholar is saying, and to want to look into the issue further and try to understand why am I misunderstanding this point. That's if it is coming from someone you really respect, and you know that he is a scholar and he has the respect of other scholars and so forth. Now, if it's coming from someone you don't know, or someone who does not have that kind of status, then a couple of things. You can just ignore it if it doesn't affect you. I mean, someone just emails it to you and you have nothing to do with it. I wouldn't let it bother you. If some sheikh says something that according to your understanding goes against the Qur'an Sunnah, and you don't know who that sheikh is or how reliable he is, I would just put it in the wastebasket, recycle bin. And now, if it is something then, though, there's a lot of different issues here. It might be something that is a fatwa that's causing maybe a fitna in your community, And so therefore you have to look into it. I mean, you can't avoid it. You can't just say, well, I won't worry about that. You have to look into it and see whether it is correct or not, see what other scholars say, and so forth. So that's the way I would look at it. I would see, where this fatwa came from. If it is someone who is really respected, I would try to understand why is my understanding different from his. And I think many times you will discover that you were wrong and the scholar was right. Sometimes you might find that the scholar was made a mistake. As I said, every human being is prone to make mistakes. And just because a scholar makes a mistake, that doesn't mean that he's no longer a scholar, should no longer be respected or something of that nature. Some people, unfortunately, have a tendency to go to extremes on this point. But, people do make mistakes. People are going to make mistakes. And sometimes the mistakes can be, clearly mistakes. And you don't have to worry about them. The person is a human being. He made a mistake. Again, if it is from someone you don't know, or if it is from someone who is known not to be of that great level of knowledge, and it goes against what you have been taught and understand, and if it is maybe causing a fitna or something of that nature, then I would research the issue further, inshallah. But if it's just from someone you don't really know and it's something maybe not that important, then I would just ignore it. Don't let the shaitan enter into your heart to make you start doubting your religion or doubting what you know and so forth, because this is one of the ways of shaitan, without any doubt.
Is there, I'm sorry, my knowledge is limited. During the days of Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, I know his teaching was practiced. After he's dead, the Sahaba takes over. Based on your knowledge, have they ever been putting out fatwa during the Sahaba's days? Have they been putting out fatwa?
Have they made fatwa? Even during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, if the Prophet ﷺ was not there, and where they were at a particular time and they had to make a decision, they would make a fatwa. So yes, this is part of the flexibility of the Islamic Sharia, that not everything is fixed, in stone, that there's no flexibility whatsoever. But alhamdulillah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has brought this deen in such a way that there are sometimes different circumstances, different times in which the ruling may differ. And this is why they say about fatwa that a fatwa can change with time and place. Now it's very important to understand, when they say that, they are not talking about something that is definitive in the Qur'an and Sunnah. Now some people quote this statement that fatwa changes with time and place, and then they apply it to something definitive in the Qur'an and Sunnah. No scholar ever meant that when they said fatwa changes with time and place. But for example, what country is your ancestors from? Your father, who is the Imam?
Oh, it's from Sierra Leone.
Where?
Sierra Leone.
Sierra Leone. Okay, so there could be circumstances in Sierra Leone where your father follows a certain way or does a certain thing because of the culture and circumstances there. And then you living here, you might have to do things differently because the culture is different here. Yeah. But these are all things that are not fixed in the Qur'an and Sunnah, are not definitively defined and laid out in the Qur'an and Sunnah. So that's another aspect you have to be aware of with respect to fatwa. But the idea of fatwa and having to give rulings, this started during the time of the Prophet ﷺ. Didn't even have to wait till after he died. But after he died, obviously, many new circumstances came up, and the Sahaba were forced obviously to make fatwa. Doesn't mean they enjoyed it, or they didn't want to pass it on to others if they could, but they did.
One question. What is your, from your personal experience, what is your advice on learning the Arabic language? How should we approach it?
Okay, now
someone doesn't have access to an Arab teacher.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I would not necessarily follow the steps that I took. I mean, everyone is following steps that are, based on their circumstances. If I had my choice about the matter and done whatever I wanted to do, it would have been much differently than when it turned out. What year did you go to Medina?
19.
1980, okay. So, for example, I had received a scholarship to go to Medina, but earlier than, I think, around 80 or 81. And just the circumstances did not allow me to go. And obviously, if you can go to a place like Medina or Egypt or Riyadh or someplace, and where they actually sit you down in a room and make you learn, and you know, and examine you over it and so forth. And also, you're around the, you know, some of the American brothers in Medina, maybe they just hung out with one another. So, but I mean, if you're actually within the environment where you hear the language being spoken and so forth, you know, this is obviously the best way to learn the language. But if you cannot do that, does not mean that you just give up completely. There are a number of books, for example, that can be used. Inshallah, and almost in most communities that I'm aware of, there are Arabic speakers who can also help you and assist you. So try, as I said, everyone has their own circumstances. Look at your circumstances and try to find out what is the best way that you can learn. Now, even over the internet, there's many ways that you can learn. I think nowadays, even there may not be too many excuses for an individual not to at least try to learn Arabic, whether it is the internet or local classes or something of that nature. Me personally, I benefit a lot from a textbook called Elementary Modern Standard Arabic. If your English grammar is good, this textbook is very good. If your English grammar is not so good, I use this book when I teach Arabic in Boulder, and sometimes most of the students are non-Americans, and I had, for example, some Indonesian and Malaysian brothers, and they come to class, you know, and so some questions come up. I have to explain the English grammar first because they're using all of the English grammar terms in the book. And they said, "MashaAllah, we're learning English and Arabic in the same class."
Usually, non-Americans have better grammar than Americans. English, that's a common thing. We have to go at 2:30, so we have about 15 minutes. Just want to remind you about this. This is the flight schedule.
And I think Abu Muslim, I'll promise you 5 minutes, inshallah. So we have 10 minutes. Inshallah.
Living in a society, and what is the best way to raise and protect our children from the influences of the society, TV, movies, the culture, and how can we instill the love of in children from the very beginning?
I prefer not to answer these kinds of questions. And the reason why is because although I've been married for many years, I don't have any children. And I found in the past that every time I spoke about these issues, the response was always, "Oh, you don't know what you're talking about, you don't have children, you don't live with it." So I just kind of gave up after a while. So I'm going to have to apologize, and I'm going to avoid this question and recommend that you ask this question, inshallah, to people who have that experience and know, inshallah, what are the steps to be taken. But an equally valid question is, how do we protect ourselves and our adults from the influences of society here in TV and so forth? So for example, I'm someone who is not into the internet. I don't go to the internet. I don't have it at home, and I use it like the law of the darura. And if I have to go someplace and look into the internet, I am not convinced yet. Although obviously there's many good things on the internet, right? Even I will admit that. And if it were under Islamic guidance, it could be a fantastic means of knowledge and so forth. But the reality is that's not the case, you know. And I'm not convinced yet that for Muslim personality, and especially if we're talking about society as a whole or community as a whole, that it is more beneficial than harmful. And I'll give you the example of TV. TV in some Muslim lands, the introduction was very strict and they were very careful about it. And then over time, this eroded. Even if you go to some of the strict Muslim countries now, you can find, you just walk down the street and you see advertisements for Showtime. Okay, and in one of the strictest Muslim countries, here's an advertisement for Showtime, the cable station. So over time, people they just start taking more and more, and the limits, the boundaries start eroding, and this becomes very dangerous. And I don't think there's any question that this is now in Muslim society become something much more harmful than good. And Muslim scholars were not strong enough, I think, to oppose that kind of thing. And now, with respect to the internet, Muslims have once again gotten into it heavily without weighing all the costs and the benefits. And the problem is you cannot just take an individual. For example, everyone in this room that I'm speaking to, you maybe have never been harmed by anything in the internet. You know where to go, you know how to handle it, and it is a safe tool for you. But we're not talking about just you. We're talking about encouraging people to go to the internet by putting everything on the internet. And then when you encourage them to go to the internet, even if they're just looking for Islamic websites, some of these Islamic websites will give them stuff that is not good. And they may not have the tools to recognize what is good and what isn't good. And who knows what path you might lead them down. So it's not just our children that we have to be worried about. That's how I got started on it. I was trying to remember how did I get started on this. Not just our children, but even ourselves. Living in this culture and in this society, we have to be careful about what we're allowing ourselves to be influenced by. And I'm not saying it's easy. It's easy to become lazy and just like, let me go just watch the news. News is done in half an hour. So you watch another news, it's just the same thing as the other news, right? And then you watch a third one. So by this time you're bored and you're also drained. People don't realize how much, for example, TV can drain you. And I assume the internet is the same. But I know because I've seen studies about TV. TV, it looks passive, but in reality, it drains you of energy. And so after watching 3 news of the same news over and over again, then you're not in the mood to get up, so you just flip around and see what else is on. And then who knows how many hours you might be wasting. Maybe not, I'm not talking about looking at or watching something that is explicitly haram, but maybe spending time watching stuff that there's just no benefit from. And you're losing those hours and you can't get them back. Wallahu alam. Is it quick? Is it like a yes or no question?
Not really. But hopefully it won't be that long. I wanted to ask you about like people who go to college, like college students, and what fields we should get into in terms of like da'wah. Like a lot of Muslims are into like medicine and stuff like that, but I think it's time to branch out. So what advice would you give and what fields to go to, like different fields in terms of da'wah and just to
Well, Islamic studies definitely is not one of the fields. Yas is not here to comment on that. One thing that, again, it depends on the individual. And it depends on how strong of a background that the individual has. But I think it is important to try to study things like the philosophy of science, to understand what is going on in this society, or even to study, to some extent, the social sciences. Not from the point of view of trying to get guidance from them, but seeing in reality what are these social sciences all about. For example, economists claim that capitalism will lead to the best of all possible worlds. Capitalism will lead to the best of all possible worlds. And people are promoting capitalism with the idea that it does lead to good things. But if you study it and you study the methodology and the philosophy behind it, you see how it's not really the case. And even the theoretical leading to the best of all possible worlds is based on such assumptions that don't exist in the world, that you realize that capitalism is not actually practical and so forth. So those brothers who are in, let's say, computers and all these kinds of sciences, I think sometimes it is good that if they have the capability, to study also these other things quickly and briefly, not major in them necessarily, but to see what is the way of thinking in these other fields, because this is also very important for da'wah. You have to understand how did these people come to the conclusions that they've come to, and what is their way of thinking and so forth. So I think.
About 5 minutes.
You're going to take his 5 minutes?
We'll have time, inshallah.
Okay, so one last question, inshallah.
Yeah, this is very quick. Just a question on best.
It's very quick and it's a two-part question. Is that what you just said?
A lot of these American Islamic universities are now available in North America. Which one are the ones you would recommend? American Open University, AIU, there's so many now. And number 2, must-read books in Arabic and English.
Must-read books? Is that the... my work's excluded, right? Yes, what is available on the internet? I've had some involvement with some of them, but it's been now probably a few years since I've had some involvement. But for example, AOU, they started out, I think, very well. I'm not sure what their situation is right now, but at least at the beginning, I know that they had some good courses, and you could benefit a lot from AOU. Some of the others I'm not really that familiar with. Of course, Al Maghrib Institute, if you can benefit from Al Maghrib Institute, they are doing a lot of good work, and most of the brothers who are involved with Al Maghrib Institute, or maybe the majority, I know them personally, and mashallah, I'm very impressed with these brothers. So I would definitely recommend them, inshallah. Must-read books. That is a difficult question, because in each field, you can come up with a list of must-read books. So let me give that some thought. And next time I come to New Jersey, you can ask me again. Should be. I come every 8 years. 8 years, 9 years. And last time I came, it was Atlantic City. A small mosque there that used to be a crack house. That was a very nice... that's the Atlantic City that you never hear about. And it's not the famous part of Atlantic City that I went to. Inshallah. Oh. There's a lot of books that I like. Okay, don't get me wrong. There's a lot of books that I like, but it's just I'm just kind of drawing a blank. Sometimes if you have too much to choose from, it's difficult to choose. But
the Qur'an.
Qur'an. Gee, why didn't I think of that? Qur'an and Hadith, of course. I'm just drawing a blank because, inshallah, I will give it some thought. Maybe I will fax Why Islam, and they can maybe post my must-read list. Inshallah, I'm sorry, I'm just drawing a blank. Inshallah, barakallahu feekum. Inshallah, we'll see each other again, inshallah. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you for your time and your efforts, inshallah. Barakallahu feekum. Wassalamu alaikum.